Up until that point, I thought it was all about like money and drugs and women, but he like showed me a completely different way. I was hooked to the lyricism of it and how you could paint these pictures in like almost a Shakespearean way if you really wanted to.
Welcome to Stories of Creativity. I'm your host, Jo Vertis, and in this episode, we're continuing the interview with Skye Magus. Skye shares in this part how rapping led to songwriting and how his intuitively inspired lyrics can often teach him things years later that he wasn't aware of at the time he wrote them. He talks about how his multifaceted artistic interests led him to video game development and how making games can be similar to performing street magic. You'll also hear a sample of his rap. You've also done a lot with music, and I heard some of your rap as well as some of your other songs. How did you get into rapping, and what kind of unique joy have you gotten out of that is different from your other creative activities?
I grew up inside of a very conservative household. You know, I grew up in a Baptist home, and so there was a lot of things that my dad didn't want me to participate in. Rap was one of them. So I was like forced to listen to rock, bluegrass, stuff like that. I think the only rap that was allowed in the house was the Beastie Boys. And so I didn't really get into that side of myself until I went through like the system. When I ended up inside of like juvenile hall and like, you know, group homes and stuff. I remember I was 15 or 16 and my roommate was getting released. So he gave me a bunch of his stuff, including a bunch of his CDs. And so one of the CDs that he had was like Linkin Park, Hybrid Theory. He also had Outkast, Quimini. He had a couple of other rap albums, Lab Cabin California by The Far Side. And these were like the things I was introduced to with rap. And at the time, like, you know, I had heard a bunch of rap songs. I had heard a bunch of R&B, but like, they were like Biggie, Tupac, Bone Thugs and Harmony and stuff like that. So like, you know, I had them on the peripheral of my ears, I guess, growing up, but like never been able to listen to them. And so when I got like these rap albums, like Outkast blew my mind, especially Andre 3000. Like he completely changed the game for me. Up until that point, I thought it was all about like, you know, money and drugs and women, but he like showed me a completely different way. And then Farside on top of that showed me a completely different avenue that you could go with lyricism. And I was hooked to the lyricism of it and how you could paint these pictures in like almost a Shakespearean way if you really wanted to. And so that stuck with me. I started rapping and trying to get better at it. And then when I was 17, 18, 19, something like that, I ended up meeting my brother, J-Mo. And J-Mo was also a rapper. And he, you know, had grew up with like Mos Def and like, you know, the East Coast side of things, even though he was from Texas. So we linked up and he taught me a couple of tricks on how to rap better. And he said that it started with freestyling. And he gave me a couple of tips on how to do that. And from there, he had his own like studio inside of his garage. So I would just go over to his house all the time and we would start rapping. And we laid down a whole track that to this day, whenever I talk to him, he's like, when you gonna give me that album again? And I'm like, it's gone. It's gone forever. I can't find it.
Oh,
but
sad.
No, it's definitely depressing because it was like it was our pride and joy, you know. But that's how I got into rap, and I was definitely using that skill for a long time before it got kind of easy for me in a way. I could have definitely continued to progress in it, but I realized that I wanted to do music and not so much just rap. And that's how I got into guitar, and I never looked back.
Well, that's awesome. I really loved the words in your song Complete.
That was my first ever like I said, we we had made a whole album together called Truth, Trooth, because it was like the root of truth. And this was the first Complete was the first song that I had ever done by myself.
I know the feeling of listening to something that was, one of your earliest works in a in a art form or a genre.
Let's be clear. I definitely pick it apart in my head, but I do know that that's where I was at that point, and I still gather things from it to this day. Like my old music, I still will gather things from it where I'm like, wow, I was so far ahead of even myself that like I'm just now understanding how tapped into the universe I was with these songs. So like, yeah, no, I probably will learn something from it if I listen to it. So sure, go ahead.
That's cool. Thanks. Just a quick question about that. Are you saying that something got revealed in a song you wrote that you weren't even completely consciously aware of yourself until later?
Yes. I when I rapped, and my brother hated this, I was so tapped into the universe. It wasn't me really writing. It was more of like, it would just flow through me. And I could write like 3, 4, 5 pages of rap for a song in like 10 minutes. Wow. Whereas wow. My brother would take like 7 hours to write a song. He really definitely was like, bro, what the hell? Because like we would sit down and I'm like, all right, I'm ready to lay my track. He's like, it's been like 5 minutes. And I'm like, I know, but like, here we go. And it would come out sick. So, but I'm definitely more in his point now. Like he was like 10 years older than me. So like, as I'm in my 30s now, I'm having the exact same problems. I've tried to write raps down and I'm not as in tune with that connection as I once was. So like what I'm saying is like, yeah, I was tapped into a source that I'm not as tapped into anymore. So there are plenty of things that I still learn from my old music all the time.
Amazing. That's so cool. Okay, well, I'm going to give this a shot here.
I'm all I can be. All I can be. All I can be. Left LA for a new outlook, feeling fresh but scared. I've been in too many placements, institutions have me snared. Solitude wasn't there, yet I hadn't seemed to care. No love lost, I was finally out of my dad's hair. Good riddance, never forgave. A lot I had withstood, wishing I was a regular in a regular hood. Knowing that I was free, the feeling was ultimate good. Waiting for that dropping shoe, knocking on wood. I let myself go completely nude in front of the crowds, only cause I would rather live forgotten, covered in shrouds. Life seems too simple for me now. I'm not holding on to anything no more. My life I'm not controlling, but I don't feel it's stolen. More it's molten, something that's pure under God's fire. Molten emotions turn precious like sapphire. I am complete. Ain't nothing wrong with me. I'm okay. I am happy. Got nothing but love for all that I see. It's like I am not weak. There is no pain for me. There's only strength. I live for me. I do my God's will. I'm all I can be.
So the funny part about this song is that it was an anthem for myself. We talked about this earlier, but I always have been surrounded by fears that are irrational to most people, but not to me. One of the things that I've also always struggled with is, and I used to say it a lot inside of my raps, whenever I freestyled, I would say things like, sometimes I feel like an alien that saw this planet and crash landed and now I'm stranded. I'm not panicked, but and like go into a whole rhyme scheme, but like, I always felt like I was different than everybody else. And the more I interacted with people, because I'm a sociable person, the more I realized that people didn't have the type of thinking that I had, where like I would constantly break the world down around me and really just try and analyze what was happening. And because of that, I always felt like I was different and I was out of the loop. I felt like most people we're comfortable inside of a sense of this is how the world works. This is how the planet works. This is how the laws of science work. And I was always like, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? So it led towards a lot of me breaking through a metaphorical barrier of things and seeing things in a out of the box type of way. And when you start to have experiences while looking at things in a completely different way than the nature of most of society, I personally took it and got scared. When certain unexplainable phenomena started happening to me, I got really, really terrified because I guess in writing, it's called crossing the first threshold, where you have the refusal of the call and then you have something happen that affects you personally as the character, and then you cross into the first threshold. You're on the journey and you can no longer go back to the life that you had before. And so for me, I crossed the first threshold a long time ago. My mom calls me overly sensitive to, like, you know, things outside of the norm. Growing up, I wanted all of it. And then I started getting a taste of it and I was scared. So this song, Complete, was like me, I guess, writing a letter to myself that it was going to be okay. And like writing a letter from like my future perspective that everything's fine. So that's what this whole thing was. It was like looking back through the years that I hadn't even been through yet.
Wow, that sounds powerful. Was it helpful? Was it comforting to write that?
At different points in my life, yes. And like I said, I always kind of get a different perspective of it and a different thing. The more I go through, the more I look back on myself. And a lot of my stuff was like letters towards my future self. So a lot of my music, a lot of my stories, a lot of my everything has always been more towards like, hey, future self, can you like tell me everything's going to be okay? Because right now I don't feel okay. And like, yeah.
That's so smart. That's really cool that you do that. I too have written songs that I wound up needing, and they helped me later. And at the time that I wrote them, I didn't know what I was writing them for, or that they were going to be really pertinent to my life. But something in the lyrics, like I remember one time I found out about something bad that had happened right after I wrote a song. And then I looked back at the song and realized it was the comfort I was going to need, you know, just a few weeks later.
Nice. I love the being in the zone and being in like connection with certain elements will like lead you towards things where like you're like, wow, I was ahead of myself at that point. You know, like when you look back on it.
Right.
I have a song that I did called Little Titan. I wrote it wanting to talk to like, you know, the younger generation growing up, but also like wanting to talk to my inner child and wanting to talk to my future self all at the same time. And it's one of my favorite songs. I always knew that I was going to make video games. I had too many skills in the arts that I was decent to good at. So I was always kind of being drawn to all of them at the same time. I would start a project, like I would, you know, start a project of writing a novel. And then I would get a good idea for like a web comic. And then I would be doing both of those at the same time. And then I would get a good idea for like a music album. And so then I'd be doing those three things, and then I would get a good idea, and it would just keep going, and I would never finish anything. So I was trying to find something that I could put all of those into at the same time. And I think that's where I kind of like went with, I should probably make video games.
Cool. And how are you enjoying that? You've been making video games for a while now, right?
I've definitely been trying to. I can't say that I've ever put a game out or finished a game, but I'm definitely going to school for it. the way I look at it now is different than how I did before I started school. And in like the 10 or 13 years that I was doing it by myself with like YouTube tutorials and stuff, it's a weird thing because I take it as when I was a street magician for a little bit. You know, I had a lot of friends in New Orleans that were street magicians, and so they taught me a couple of tricks, and then like, you know, I got good at a couple of things and started doing performances for a split second. And it's a weird thing. It's kind of the magician's effect, where when you know how the trick is done because you're performing it, you see it in a different light. You don't have that wonder anymore because you know exactly how it's done. And it kind of like kills a little bit of that, but it changes it into a different thing. Now it's less about how the trick is done and more about how well you can do the trick to make others think, oh my gosh, you know? So like it's a weird thing. And that's how I feel about like, I guess, game making now. I had started that when I was 7, 8, or 9. Actually, I might have been 11 when my dad first bought me my first video game program to work on. And I've been doing it kind of all my life, or trying to. And now that I'm in school for it, it's kind of like the trick is dead, but I'm enjoying creating the trick now. So.
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, because you won't ever enjoy a video game the same way now that you've made them. Is that what you mean?
I mean, to a certain extent, I look at video games now because, you know, I still game all the time. It's a different joy, I want to say. It's less a, oh, this video game is amazing. And it's more, I know how they did that. I know how they did that. Oh my God, that is a cool feature. And so like you look at it in a different light and you can enjoy it for the work that's put into it as opposed to, sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely don't listen to music the way I did before I went to music school.
Yeah.
So I know what you mean. Yeah. Interesting. This was just something that I got really curious about. I wanted to know more. You ghost wrote a couple of books, and I was curious how that came about and what that was like.
Basically, how it came about was I ended up finding this site that was for, you know, people who were looking for jobs. It was like back at the time that like Craigslist was really popular. There was a lot of things for like artists and for like, you know, people who were programmers and stuff, but there was also for writers. And so I just kept putting out my information, and in doing so, I ended up getting hired for a couple of jobs. And they paid me up front and told me what they wanted, and I just ghost wrote for them. Nice. I had no rights to any of the copyright or anything like that. But like, you know, I got paid outright and made a couple of books. So yeah.
Were they fiction or nonfiction?
They were fiction, and I think one of them was a self-help book.
Oh, interesting. And how did it feel to write a book and author a book and then not have your name on it? I
actually loved it.
Yeah.
The way I saw it, I needed to improve my writing, which is something that to this day I'm still doing. I personally hate these 2 books. I don't even read them because I know that like I've gotten better over time. But it really did help me to learn how to have a schedule, because like, you know, I had a certain amount of time to finish them. It's something that to this day, I feel like if I were to ever write a book for myself, I have that knowledge in the background and I'm like, okay, I can do this, no problem. You know,
it's really cool. You found a way to make some money while improving a skill that you wanted to improve.
Exactly.
Thank you for watching part 2 of my interview with Skye Magus. I hope it sparked a new idea or perspective for your own creative work. Part 3 will be coming out soon. I hope you have a wonderful day with your creativity, my friend. See you next time. Bye.